So right now we are standing in the bootleg fire scar. What ended up happening here was the most extreme fire behavior I have seen in my career. We had a fire tornado actually touch down. The fire moved through so hot and so fast that it essentially instantly sucked all of the moisture out of the needles, and they are now frozen in the direction of the wind when the fire hit.
You remember Smokey the Bear? Well, he was only half right. For more than a century, firefighting has focused almost solely on fire suppression. But forests and fire-prone environments actually need to burn regularly to prevent extreme blazes.
There certainly needs to be a paradigm shift.
Fire is a part of the land. It's the same thing. We shouldn't talk about one and the other. We should talk about them both at the same time at all times. Somewhere along the line, we became successful in preventing it to the degree that conditions change over time, and now a fire comes through, it's so destructive that we are fearful of it.
These systems burned on average every 13 years. If you don't let any fire come through here for 100+ years, you've missed 10 cycles. When you miss 10 cycles and you add climate-adapted disturbance, this is what you end up with.
In the past 10 years, federal fire suppression costs have risen 400%, while there's been virtually no additional investment into fire resilience. Fighting fire simply is not enough anymore. That's why firefighters and communities are increasingly pushing for a different model of fire mitigation entirely, one that has its roots in centuries-old indigenous practices, controlled burning. Tribes across the West and around the world once regularly stewarded the land with controlled burns to keep the forest healthy and protect from unwieldy forest fires. The Klamath tribe and others are part of an effort to bring these practices back into regular use.
When we put a prescribed fire through under, very intentional, planned conditions, we're reducing the amount of vegetation that can burn. We're reducing the ability of that vegetation to get into the crowns of the trees. That reduces the flame length, and what all of that does is it opens up our toolbox. Hand tools, bulldozers, helicopters, air tankers, all of a sudden all of those tools are now effective for us in a way that they're not in some of these untreated stands.
When the bootleg fire burned through the Sican Marsh Preserve in Oregon's Klamath Basin, some of the land had been treated with controlled burns. Some of it hadn't.
So from these maps, what we see is that the areas that were treated with prescribed fire behaved differently during the bootleg fire. When the fire came in and hit these treatment areas, it slowed, whereas on the boundaries there wasn't treatment, it continued to move at a faster rate.
As a firefighter on the ground in these untreated areas, what I witnessed is fast-moving fire in the crowns of the trees. Even a small little spot fire would go from a matter of inches to a matter of 30 acres in about 5 minutes. And then when you hit these treatment areas, the characteristic of the fire would shift, and you would go from having fire racing through the tops of the trees to fire that was burning with 4 to 6 foot flame lengths. And in those areas, you can actually put firefighters, heavy equipment, and we were actually ultimately able to stop the bootleg fire. From this place that we're standing, it's pretty illustrative of treatment versus no treatment. Both of these sides of the road burned at the exact same time, under the exact same conditions. This is the difference.
I don't know if there's anybody that we could bring out here that could not see the benefit of the treatments and how they affected the fire.
With our forests in crisis and climate change accelerating, it will take historic levels of investment to change the way we fight fire. One way to get us there is the Civilian Climate Corps, a bold plan that could create an estimated 1.5 million jobs over 5 years, including in areas like fire mitigation and forest management.
Similar to the Conservation Corps that President Roosevelt created during the Great Depression, put a new generation of Americans to work.
What if 3 months after the authorization of a Civilian Climate Corps, 250,000 young people were employed in a dignified job? What if this led to record performance in containing our wildfires across the country?
The CCC is part of the Build Back Better bill, which is currently being blocked by conservative Democrats.
The ultimate takeaway for me is this never should have happened. It could have easily been prevented, and we're still missing the funding opportunities to prevent this from happening in the future.
We have spent over 100 years to create the situation that resulted in this, right? So the paradigm shift needs to happen where we're prioritizing treatments, ecological thinning, prescribed fire on the landscape to create a mosaic so that we can catch these fires when they happen.
There's a stigma, obviously, when it comes to fire, and that started a long time ago because they saw how destructive it could be. But, you know, the reason it's so destructive is because we interrupted its process. I think it's fairly easy to see out here that if we put these forests back into a condition to where it can handle fire, it actually benefits the environment. The land, it's here because of the processes. Fire is the process. It's the process.